Yeah, I think I'm quite keen to test and try all kinds of different technologies. But one thing I have realized is that technology does not replace learning. It should be platforms and formats to kind of make the learning happen, but not necessarily be the focus of the lesson. And quite often that's where teachers tend to get a bit astray with things. But ultimately, if you are able to, I think the key thing that comes to my mind when I think about how I would teach, I win the lotto and I set up my perfect learning environment, how I would do that. It's about what makes students engage, or any learner, whether that's in a professional context or not. And it's ultimately trying to get them to take the information that you've got and make some sense of it, and then ultimately as a teacher being able to assess whether there's understanding, whether there's learning taking place. And part of that process could be easier if they engage in ways that they like and that they can relate to. For example, I've done something recently with a group where they had to do a activity where they had to build something with paper in little groups, and then we were going to discuss how that involved group dynamics and all those processes. So what we did is they built their things. I took photos as they were doing this of the processes they went through, and while they were doing this I put this into something called Box, and then straight away I opened it on my laptop, which was connected to a projector. So by the time they ended their activity, their work was up on screen and we discussed it. And it's okay, so now if you look at what so and so did here, what do you think went wrong there? And they engage with that immediately because A, it was their work in formats that we've then used to just kind of simplify. Oh, everyone can see it up there now in different stages. So that's just something where we used a bit of cloud software, a phone, a projector and a laptop to take the process and make it into something that they can link into. This is what I've just done. Now it's up there. Now I can talk about it. It's recorded. And then afterwards what I did is I've linked that to their online scheme of work, which they can access through a Google site, which straight away after the session, it's on their phones, it's on their tablets, and they can access it from anywhere. So they've learned, they've used technology to kind of discuss these processes, and it was a bit of a recap because now they saw what they did. They could then discuss what they've done, and all these processes were facilitated using a variety of different bits of technology, and it just makes it easier. A, they like it because it's theirs. B, it's technologies that they use on a day-to-day basis, phone, tablets, those type of things. And I can assess learning because I can now see if they've understood or not based on how they've engaged in the processes. We can go back to it next week, it's still there, and they can then link back to that. So all it's great to have, and I think internet is obviously one of those key things you need. So you need an access point to the internet to make all these processes happen, and it would be ideal if you can switch between gadgets at a drop of a hat, a bit like some of the smart TVs can now connect to your mobile technologies, and you can just transfer information from the one to the next. And ultimately, if you get a classroom to that point, it will create a seamless transition from one format to the next, from one technology to the next, ultimately with the focus of learning. Okay, now we're going to do this technological thing, and then I'm going to ask you for an answer. If it just becomes part of, now we've done this and I'm just going to throw it over there and we'll talk about it a bit more, and it just becomes this process where it just flows from the one thing to the next seamlessly without any hindrances of stop, we're going to engage technology now, stop, now we're going to get an answer. If you have that, it breaks the flow, and then people tend to lose the dynamics of the conversation, and then quite often it just becomes a bit of a robotic, now I need to answer this question because now the text stopped, I need to start type of thing. Whereas if you do have a flow from the one format to the next format, to the next technology, to the next learning concept, and there's no real differentiation between the discussion and the formats we use to communicate the discussion, if that just flows, then people are more natural in giving you responses that shows their understanding of the concepts.